Welcome to Deleted Saves. On this episode, Final Fantasy IX on the PlayStation 1. I have spoken before at length about the many worlds of the Final Fantasy game series and its evolution from standard Dungeons & Dragons style fantasy video games, starting with Final Fantasy I, to blockbuster universal force of media with a mix of magic and modern technology in Final Fantasy VII. And Final Fantasy VII was a very tough act to follow. Today's topic, 2000's Final Fantasy IX, certainly did try. Final Fantasy IX is a return to more standard plot. A war between two nations in a fantasy world where the private airship is the height of technology. The player takes on the lead role of Zidane, a thief working within a traveling circus. The circus master decides at some point to take on the job of kidnapping the daughter of the queen of the nation of Alexandria, the nation who started the current war. The kidnapping does not go quite as planned, mainly because the princess, named Garnet, had already planned to flee her homeland for the nation that hired the circus troupe to kidnap her in the first place. As can be expected from previous Final Fantasy plots, things begin to escalate from there. Magic and technology clash among the kingdoms. The characters recruit more allies into the fold, and those with the ability to summon demigod monsters known as Adolians come into play as they bring forth aircraft carrier-sized living nightmares to smash the nation's capitals and as many of the armies as possible. At length a new antagonist enters the fray, a figure known as Kuja, who uses the power of the mist, a sort of life force of the planet, to create living war machines, known as black mages, for his own purpose. If you guessed world domination, no points for you. Eventually the Queen of Alexandria is killed, and Princess Garnet is made queen in her place. At her coronation, Kuja launches his attack and attempts to steal an ultra-powerful Adolian in order to turn it on Kuja's rival, nicknamed Garland, who is somehow suppressing the planet in Kuja's view. Others believe Garland was created to save the planet instead. Again, things continue to escalate from there, with Kuja obtaining near godhood as well, and ultimately Zidane and his crew must pit their mettle against the might of Kuja to save the planet, free centuries of recycled souls to either go on to final rest or live again, and stop all war. That's a tall order for a thief and his ragtag group of adventurers. But it wouldn't be a fantasy trope if it wasn't a ragtag group of adventurers trying to defeat a god. Despite the convoluted plot, Final Fantasy IX has a lot going for it that helped it stand out against its predecessors. It is an extremely colorful and stylized game, by which I mean it is very cartoony in its graphics as opposed to the more lifelike depictions of some of the previous games. It is almost like a Final Fantasy game filtered through a Pirates of the Caribbean lens. It features perhaps the most diverse and creative cast in Final Fantasy history, with humans, humanoids, and anthropomorphic characters being in your cast of heroes. The Rat Lady Knight Freya and the living doll Black Mage Vivi being fan-favorite standouts in that category. And it has perhaps one of the wildest from out-of-left-field twists I've ever seen in a JRPG. Seconds after defeating the final boss, a second final boss appears in the form of a universe-traveling sentient undead planet who just happened to be passing by during your battle with the final boss, witnessed your fight, and decides to fight you next, literally by killing your whole party, then telling you, the player, in essence, pick 4 for me to resurrect and fight me, motherfucker. Final Fantasy IX is a fine return to form for Square, with many new additions that retain quite a few of the tricks the developers had learned along the way, and a mix of the crazy fun of the two games that came before it. Final Fantasy IX even had a card-collecting minigame that can be worthwhile if you choose to follow it, for the Witcher 3 fan in your life. The game did well critically, but some of the biggest complaints are that the battles could last a little too long, and the main villain is dull, and I have to agree with this last one. Kuja just fails in comparison to the likes of Kefka or Sephiroth. But this game is still a worthwhile addition to the Final Fantasy canon and for the collection of a JRPG fan. It is also, I feel, the last truly good Final Fantasy game that was made. After dedicating much time and several sterling entries to the series' history, I realize that this is a downer of a note to end upon. So much of 9 is bonkers gonzo presentation that it makes up for its own shortcomings and genuinely highlights Final Fantasy games when they are at their best, taking the tropes of fantasy and the tropes of science fiction and just running with them, joining them together in strange and if not new, at least amusing ways, and not being too serious or too stuck in the mold of fantasy. This would be the last time Square had struck that balance just right. Just enough to make a memorable and hearty meal out of a pile of leftovers, odds and ends. Everything we got after that was just crumbs and moldy rehashes. Thank you for listening.